Hello, I'm Lauren, that awkward plant girl. Welcome back to my channel. It's so good to see you guys. Thank you guys for popping in. Today I want to go over how I built and set up my terrarium. It's a 75 or 70 gallon terrarium. I don't remember which, but I wanted to go over step by step how I built it and everything that took place in it, why I did what I did and how I did it. So the first thing that I did was spend a lot of time looking for a specific size tank. I wanted to get a very, very large one so I could put bigger plants in there. I also wanted to build out the back myself and kind of experiment with that. Bigger tank meant that I had more room to make mistakes. This is the first tank that I ever built this way. This is the first time working with the spray foam this way. I have used foam in other projects, but in a terrarium, not so much. So I really wanted to make sure that I had room to mess up and it would be a lot easier to fix. So the first thing that I did was make sure that I got a very, very large terrarium, and I made sure that I used a coupon. I ended up getting this one for about $100, which was awesome. I found it at Petco. I ordered it, had it ready, went there to go and get it. I had to fit it in my car. My husband had to help me load it into my car, which I have moved all kinds of furniture, dressers, desks, bookshelves, sofas, all by myself, not needed any help. These tanks are heavy. And then I needed help getting it up the stairs. It was just an ordeal. It was an interesting ordeal, to the point that my poor husband is now traumatized, and when I say I'm going to get new terrarium tanks, he says, "Is it another big one?"
Pivot! Pivot! Shut up! Shut up! Shut up! Okay, I don't think it's gonna pivot anymore. You think?
That's how bad. But I am truly grateful, truly blessed. Like, I am so happy to have done this. Just wanted to toss that out there so you understand when you go to get it that even though it says that it's 75 gallons, it does not look as big as it actually is on screen. It's bigger in person. Like, this was 4 feet, almost 5 feet. It's huge. I love it though. So after I got the tank, we got it all up here. After all that, I ended up cleaning it out. You use rubbing alcohol and just a soft cloth, and you just wipe and sterilize everything. You don't know what was in that tank before you got into it, so you want to make sure that any spores, any pests, any diseases, anything that could possibly damage your plants or ruin what you are trying to make in there, you want to get all that out. There could also be chemicals in there that wouldn't work so well with the foam and the other substrates, so we wanted to make sure that that came out as well. So after we got the tank all cleaned out, I decided to do the terrarium in section. I wanted to leave built-in spaces for plants to be kind of tucked in sphagnum moss or perlite, so I used pots and I kind of taped them to the tank, which was a good and a bad idea. I think next time, because I did learn this as I went along, the foam underneath the pot and place the pot there and then use the foam to kind of hold the pot in, not tape it. But taping it in the initial setup was a good idea so that the pots would stay where I wanted and I could figure out the layout of it. So it's a good starting position, but when you start to foam, make sure that you're foaming under it. Don't rely on the tape there. So, which seems common sense now, but at the time it was not. After I decided the layout of the pots, I started to foam. I got the special foam here and I looked it up on various terrarium websites which foam was going to be the best, because I wanted to make sure that it was going to be able to withstand the higher humidity and that it wasn't going to damage my plants. So this is the specific one that was recommended in various terrarium websites. Josh's Frogs has a whole giant blog of various ones on there. Definitely go take a look at them. I will try to find it and link it down below for you guys. So I used everything that they recommended in there as well. So if you're looking for specific products, definitely check out their site. But I went and I took the foam and I used it in a horizontal motion. The foam does expand. It expands up to 2 times its size. So I used thin strips and then let it expand. I had to do it in stages and layers because of the way the foam expanded. So I ended up doing the very back and got that all layered, let that sit and dry overnight, came back the next day, turned the terrarium on its side, set up the pots there, and then I went and I foamed that in as well. So, and then I also went back and let that dry, did the other side, and then I went over everything again and made sure to foam everything back in. Removed the plastic pots so that it left the little sections, and I wanted to make sure that the plants were not going to be sitting on the glass, but in the actual foam. I don't know if that matters or not. It was just something that I felt would be best if I'm going to be watering. I wanted all the water to stay in the little cup areas, not running down the back of the tank, if that makes sense. I didn't want to leave places for mold and mildew and algae to get to that I wasn't going to be able to regularly clean out if I needed to. And I also did not want to destabilize the backing. I don't know if that's an actual thing. It was just something in my head. So I made sure to fill in all the little holes and cracks and crevices so that it was all just one big sheet, and there were little pockets for the plants to go in. And of course, this took several days to happen because I had to allow the foam to harden off every single day. So every time I sprayed some foam, it would be hard enough that it wouldn't be sticky to touch within 30 minutes, but because it continued to expand and I was going to have to be shaping it after that, I wanted to make sure that everything was hard enough. So it took me about 4 days to just foam the entire terrarium. It's definitely it definitely takes quite a bit. I believe I used 5 or 6 cans of this foam as well. Definitely get more, have more later. I did have to make another trip to the store to get it as well. They were only like $2 per can, so it wasn't a very expensive thing. The most expensive part was actually the Sphagnum Moss and the tank itself. Like I mentioned, after the foam hardened off, I went and I took a... I don't know what it's called. I'll place the specific name of the knife right here. I liked it because it was really bendy and it really allowed me to get in the cracks and crevices and shape the foam exactly the way I wanted. I wanted to make it look like it had striations. Even though it's going to be covered later, I wanted to practice that technique so that if I ever wanted to make specific rocks, if I ever wanted to just paint over it, if I wanted to work with cork bark and have things look a certain way, I wanted to test all that out. So I really worked on those different techniques while I was shaping, and using this knife really helped with that. You basically just shave off the foam and kind of shape it how you want. I wanted it to kind of wrap around and look like the plants were kind of sitting on rock crevices, just kind of covered in moss. That's the plan. So that's what I worked with, and I just made sure that there was kind of an ebb and flow throughout the whole thing. But that's going to be personal to you when you build yours. Everybody's different. But this knife was actually really awesome. So I started out with like your standard packing knife or whatever, and then I ended up taking this particular one for my husband, and it really worked out super, super well, to the point that I kept it and I didn't give it back to him. So he knows. He let me have it. He's cool with it. But yeah, can't recommend this particular tool enough. It was definitely crucial and made everything so much easier. It took me about 3 days of carving this particular terrarium in order to get this specific look. I don't know if it took 3 days because I didn't know what I was doing and this was new to me, or because I started out with a poor tool and ended up going with a better tool, or if it actually normally takes people that long and I didn't even get that detailed with it. So there you have it. You decide yours. Just plan on a minimum of 3 days making your thing, possibly more, possibly less, depending on whatever you're going to be doing with it. After all the carving was done, I pre-soaked the sphagnum moss, and then I wrung it out and I let it dry out, I want to say for about half a day, maybe a full 24 hours. And then I took this specific silicone, which smelled absolutely god awful. Thank goodness it was kind of warm out and I could open the windows and everything, because it smelled so horrible. I think I probably should have worn a mask while doing it. I did not. But you take the clear silicone, because they have different colors. So you can get a white silicone, a black silicone, or a clear silicone. I chose the clear because I knew I was going to cover it in sphagnum moss. And then if I was going to paint it as well, I would paint it before the silicone too. So that is another thing to keep in mind. I did go and paint it with acrylic paint at the end because I realized I wasn't going to be able to use the silicone that I had to cover the end bits. I ran out of silicone. It's not expensive, but it wasn't easy to get in my area. I had to special order it online in order to get it. I ordered mine from Amazon. It was the only place I could find that had this specific silicone. So I ran out of that, and I did end up painting afterwards. And so far the paint has held up, but it's definitely not what it would have been if I had been able to use the silicone and cover it with sphagnum moss. I think I used 4 or 5 tubes of silicone as well. It definitely takes a lot more than you think you need. So I used rubber gloves and I put the silicone on. I tried to use the paintbrush, but I ended up finding that my hand worked better with plastic gloves on, just kind of smearing it around and really getting in the cracks and crevices and just making sure to seal everything. And then I used one hand to smear the silicone, and then I used another hand to take this partially dried sphagnum moss. I didn't want it to be too moist, but I wasn't sure that if I put it on whether I was going to be able to get it to stick if it was too moist or too dry. And I wasn't sure if it was fully dry that I was going to be able to fully saturate it on a vertical wall like that. Just a whole bunch of different concerns. So this is just what I did. It's not necessarily the best way to do things, but having it pre-moistened and then just slightly dried out, I definitely wrung out and let air dried quite a bit. It did stick to the silicone just fine. There wasn't any problems with that. And so far it has been able to be spray misted and stay moist and keep a higher humidity in the plant terrarium that way as well. So it worked out really well long term so far. So silicone with one hand, sphagnum moss with the other, silicone with one hand, sphagnum moss in the other. Definitely get a giant bale of sphagnum moss if you're going to do this project, because I ran out. I did not get all. I thought I was so prepared. Like, I thought I had everything I needed. I had done the calculations. No. Get one more of everything, because you think you have enough, and then the worst comes to worst is you have extra for another terrarium later down the road, because once you start one, you're going to want another one. But anyway, worst comes to worst, you end up with a little extra. I was worried about having extra because I don't have a lot of space, and I should have gotten extra because I ended up having to run out quite a bit. But sphagnum moss, silicone, sphagnum moss, or silicone, sphagnum moss, silicone, sphagnum moss. And I just did that over the entire thing. I let it dry for 2 days, not because it needed it, but because I was really tired by this point of working on this daily and I needed a break. I think it only took like maybe a day to dry, if that. So after I was done, that was the moment of truth where I actually flipped the terrarium up and scooted it in. I got a grow light for it, put it over it, and realized I only had one grow light. That was not going to be enough. And then I decided it was going to have to be enough. Honestly, the grow light I got is a little bit too strong. It's actually burnt some of my plants, and I've had to adjust the different plants that I have in there. So that's another thing to take a look at, is the strength of your grow light. But once I made sure that the tank and the grow light were all going to fit there just fine, then I started working on my substrate and picking out the plants that I was going to put in there. I knew that I wanted to do a lot of Hoya in there. I wanted to have Hoya on the walls. And then I also knew that I was going to want some Monstera. I wanted things to be climbing. I wanted things to eventually get pretty bushy in there. I also picked out some begonia because I wanted to kind of test that out as well. I've tossed in a lot of other plants since. I'm going to do a whole like plant tour video, so that'll be there for you. But for the substrate in the bottom layers, I did do it a little bit differently. I used perlite for my base because it was the most inexpensive rock material for the bottom. Leco probably would have been better. It would have retained a little bit more. When I was foaming everything out, I made sure to leave about 1/2 inch to 1 inch on the top and 1/2 inch to 1 inch on the bottom between the foam and the edges. So that way there was room on the bottom for various substrate and all my layers. The entire foam board was not going to be sitting in my drainage layer. And I also wanted to make sure that there was space up top for any plants to grow and for me to cut them back without them being attached to the foam and the sphagnum moss. I wasn't sure how my custom made lids were going to be sitting on this because I had to make that as well. So I wanted to make sure that I had some space for a little bit of a divot. If I had to fit it in there funkily, I wanted to make sure that that was going to happen. It just felt like the right thing to do to leave a little bit of space up there. I don't really have a solid explanation for why. I just made sure to do that. It felt important for some reason. I will get the exact amounts on the screen for you for everything and the names of everything when I go and I edit all of this. So I got the perlite on the base, and then I put the charcoal on the base, and I ended up not having enough charcoal. I needed way more than I thought, and charcoal took me weeks to get. So it was going to be a 3-week wait for me to order more charcoal. So I ended up just using the bag of charcoal that I had, which covered about half of the center of the tank. Should have used more. Definitely get 2 bags if you're doing yours for this specific size tank. But the charcoal layer will be absolutely fine. I can always go back and add more. I can always add it into the substrate as well, which kind of helps. So if I wanted to add any beneficial insects in there, a lot of them would go and live in that charcoal layer. So I wanted to make sure to include some of the charcoal in there for sure. Not even for like filtration purposes really, but just to have that space. It also soaks up all of the smells, similar to baking soda when you put it in your fridge. So the charcoal will do that as well. And this is horticultural charcoal, not like charcoal briquettes that are soaked in gasoline, just to clarify. Most of you probably already know that, but if this is your first time learning about terrarium builds, I am not an expert, but definitely don't use those. Use the horticultural charcoal because it's actually made for your plants and it's safe for your plants without a whole bunch of yucky chemicals in it. And what I normally like to do for my terrariums at this point, after I put the perlite and the charcoal layers, is put a sphagnum layer. That's sort of the divider, and it'll keep the substrate separate from all of the drainage layers underneath. So, and that'll allow the water to wick up from the bottom and go up to the top and create a beautiful humidity and a closed ecosystem, which is fabulous. And sphagnum moss does break down over time though. And for smaller terrariums, I've got to take them apart every couple of years anyway, so it's not that big a deal. This one, I did not want to redo all of this ever again. Maybe in a couple of years I'll want to, but not this year. So I ended up going and buying an actual screen. I believe I got it from Josh's Frogs. I ordered theirs. And it's a very fine screen mesh that you place down, and it keeps all of the soil and the substrate mixture separate from the drainage layers, and it will not break down over time. You can leave it there for years and years and years. I think it's been like 15, 20 years that people have had the same layer in there, and it's been perfectly fine. So definitely, if you don't want to have to change anything, use that. It was fairly inexpensive. I think it was only like $6. So it worked out really well, and I just cut it to size. So that was awesome. And then after that, I had to mix up the substrate that's going into the bottom of the tank. And that one was a little bit difficult for me to calculate because normally I like to use heavy moisture retentive materials. I like to use worm castings. I like to use sphagnum moss all chopped up. I like to use a little bit of perlite for a little bit of drainage. And then I like to have charcoal in there and some potting mix. And bark, and I just like to make it a really rich and fulfilling substrate. But because this tank is so large and I wasn't sure how the sphagnum moss was going to react with all of the moisture underneath, and I wasn't sure if there was going to be enough airflow in it if I opened it regularly, because I did not want to take up space putting a fan in there as well, I made this a very, very well draining mix. I ended up using a little bit of potting mix. I ended up using bark, and then I ended up using a full bag of perlite. So this is a very well draining mix. It is not very moisture retentive, but honestly, it has worked out well in the long term. This has become a beautiful prime home for begonia and for monstera and for Hoya, just like I was thinking. If I was putting ferns in there and a lot of other heavy moisture loving plants, then I would have made it a very moisture retentive mix because I know they would have been able to handle it and they wouldn't rot from it. But because I was trying to use plants that were going to be easily rotting, I did not want that to happen. So, and then I could control the moisture by adding more or less sphagnum moss in specific areas of it is what I was thinking. So that's why I went with a very well draining mix. I know this is not something that everybody does, but because I really didn't want to have to worry about doing anything other than just putting plants in there and watering it occasionally, That's why I opted to go for that. If you have plants that are constantly rotting in your terrariums, then I highly recommend you get some type of a well-draining mix like this. You can always add more moisture retentive materials later. So that is another thing to kind of keep in mind. So after you got the substrate all in there, and when dealing with perlite, you should always wear a mask, by the way, if I didn't mention that. But after I got the substrate in there, I made sure that everything was moist. I tested it for about a week to see how it was going to handle all of the moisture. I did not have the custom made covering, so I just used plastic wrap over it, which it's a low-tech solution, but it actually worked really, really well. It had a good 2-3 inches between the plastic wrap and the grow light, so I didn't have to worry about the grow light melting the plastic wrap, and it retained the moisture in there. So it was a fantastic test. I poured water in it, and I wanted to make sure that everything was going to have humidity. I also tested on how to water the sphagnum moss because I didn't want to put plants in there and then not be able to take care of them and not be able to water them. I resisted the urge to add the plants in because that was the most exciting part. That's the part you want to get to, is just putting all the plants in. All of this prep work for weeks ahead of time was just insane. Very fun, very rewarding. I love how it looks now. It's just a lot of work. So I made sure to water the plant. It took 2 apple juice containers to fill up the base. I will calculate the exact amounts. I reuse my apple juice bottles and carry them up, and that's how I water my plants. My plant room is upstairs and all of the water is downstairs. So then after that, it was time to add the plants. There was lots of different kinds of plants that I wanted to add, and I've definitely continued to add some since. Overall, a very, very rewarding experience. Would do it again in a heartbeat, even though it was way more intimidating. It took way longer than I thought. But it's actually pretty easy, and the only thing that makes it intimidating is the amount of materials and the amount of time that it takes. So very fun, highly recommend it. Everybody should try it at least once. Maybe not on this grand of a scale, but definitely on a smaller scale, try it. But anyway, I'll see you on the terrarium plant tour video that'll be coming out soon. Thank you so much for watching. I really, really appreciate it. Hopefully this made it a little less intimidating. If you have any questions, definitely drop your comments down below. If you have any advice for next time that would make it easier, definitely drop that down below as well. I'm always open to learning new things. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!